Welcome to #Fempire, the podcast where we dive into the fascinating lives of women working in politics, policy, and public affairs. In today's episode, we're sitting down with Katherine Feenan. With nearly 2 decades of experience spanning communications, politics, and research, Katie's journey is nothing short of remarkable. From the halls of Parliament Hill to the global stage of policy and elections, we'll explore Katie's leadership at the Public Policy Forum, her international work at the National Democratic Institute, and her journey to motherhood. So sit back, relax, and join us as we unwrap the tapestry of Katie's impressive career.
Katherine Feenan's here today, and she is brilliantly talented and so down to earth. And the reason why I know this is because her and I have met in a past life. I don't know, can you qualify that as a past life in less than a year? But Katie has been amazing, and her and I met while I was being a political staffer for my boss, running around like a chicken without a head, and her supporting me and totally understanding where I was coming from. And now she's here on my podcast talking about politics and her career and life. And I'm so excited to have her. And thank you so much again, Katie, for being here.
Thank you, Julia, for inviting me. I'm really excited to have a chat with you and to talk about you as well. Talking about myself is not something I'm extremely comfortable with, but I'm really excited to just have a really good conversation with you. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And, just on the topic of politics, you're representing Madam Premier here. A Woman's Place is in the Council, the Legislature, in the House of Commons and Senate. I love it. And that's, part of my inspiration of starting this podcast is making this network for women to be able to, pick other women's brains and make that network and just hear about the different careers out there. Because I think we're just, as women, I feel like breaking our stride into various spaces like politics, business, communications. Like, I don't know, you've been around the block, Katie, what do you think of?
Well, I agree with you. And, we had those dark years of the pandemic where a lot of us stayed home and had the responsibilities piled on, not only trying to do work, but taking care of our families, wherever we are in our lives. So I feel like over the past couple of years, I've reemerged and have really tried to connect with women at various stages. I think it's really important to find time to have a coffee, to have lunch, and to realize that we're dealing with the same stuff all the time, right? Regardless of where we work and what our political stripes might have been or might be, I think it's essential to our sanity overall.
Absolutely. And to know you're not alone, because I think that was, the biggest thing we saw out of the pandemic. Like they called it a C-section for a reason.
Uh-huh.
Women in the care economy, the service industry, losing their jobs. And coming out of that, it's definitely put a lot of perspective on life. And again, part of the reason my inspiration to do this and expand my network. So I'm interested to, hear a little bit about what it was like for you being a staffer. Again, you could resonate with me when I was running around with my minister. But, you've been a political veteran. You've worked on the Hill as a staffer in the government and power and opposition, and then also for a member of parliament, and then obviously outside of that space. So what was that like for you working on the Hill and, starting maybe fresh out of school and landing this job to where you are now?
I will tell you, it wasn't my plan leaving undergrad. I finished my undergrad at UVic and I was fully, my plan was to go into international development. That was where I was going. My parents had worked in international development, so it was something I sort of knew to a degree. And, I left Victoria, and my first role, because it was a voluntary role, was with Right to Play in Ghana. And I thought, this is it, I'm going to do this. And it was a relatively new organization at the time and, going through its growing pains. And while I was there, I got the job offer to go and work on Parliament Hill. I've always been a politically interested person. I come from a family that is interested in politics, and we talk about it all the time. And we don't agree all the time. We probably don't typically vote for the same political parties. I would say neither my parents nor my brothers nor we span the spectrum in Canada, I would say. And it I looked at it and I said, okay, I'm going to try this. So that was back in 2004, very different time, 20 years ago. And I started my career for working for Lawrence O'Brien, who was the member of parliament for Labrador, and then stayed around for a little while, kind of in and out, but ultimately left in 2010. So yes, saw government for a brief period, and then spent time in opposition with a myriad of leaders.
And I think it's really interesting to hear, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. There's always conflicting views, especially in families. And coming from different political stripes, I think it helps in the conversation, right? Because you get to see the different perspectives. And because I find sometimes when you do get into being siloed, is not the best, but with that being said, everyone does have different political views, but what do you think of the current political landscape? I feel like, I don't know about you, but I feel like there's a lot of anxiety, especially, we're seeing Trump unravel right now on TV. We're coming into an election year in the US. You said you started back in the early 2000s. What do you think the political landscape is like now? We've seen this rise of populism and polarization. What do you think of that?
I mean, the political landscape obviously changes. When I was there 20 years ago, it was a very different, the issues were slightly different, right? I came into PMO during the same-sex marriage debate. You think about the reality that I lived working in political office and the reality you lived, like people were still writing letters when I was in correspondence at PMO, and the stacks of letters would come in, right? And we had one computer in the office that had, and I've told this story to a number of people because I think it's just so telling about how quickly everything changes. There's one computer in the office with the Prime Minister's email, and someone would sit down there maybe once or twice a week and answer those emails, right? It was really still, a letter-based communication system. So that's a major shift. In Canada, I mean, going back to same-sex legislation, Canada was the fourth country in the world to pass that. It's just something we understand today is look at the list of countries that have put forward similar legislation and agreed to it, and it's just part of life in Canada. But it was very controversial at the time. Absolutely. And then I look back to that time as well, and there were fewer women in office. I mean, Canada, we're still sitting at 30%. We're not at parity yet in terms of women in federal political office, or look broadly across Canada. We're not close to where we should be, but we were 20% back then. So there's that major shift, and we've all seen how women have been attacked online. It's still a reality that what a woman wears is a lot more important than what a man wears. And I'm not only saying about Canada, I'm saying about internationally. I went into Georgia in 2016, and there were videos. It was like there were recordings of women politicians, and these recordings were being used against them. Yeah. Like, who wants to live that? Right?
Like, I can't remember if it was the Prime Minister of New Zealand or Australia, where she, was just out partying, enjoying life.
Finland.
Okay, thank you, Finland. And she got scrutinized. Like, oh, she's drunk. What?
Can she not dance with her friends?
And
she's being a bad mom because she's a new mom. In terms of polarization, we hear a lot about it. It's one of those terms that sort of bantered around by, pundits, that sort of division between left and right. And I feel like that binary is an easy reach and is not necessarily a reality in Canada, right? I think we're not as polarized as our American counterparts, I would say, especially. I have family in the U.S. and there's a breakdown in discussion in terms of the Democrats not talking to Republicans and vice versa within families. I don't think that's the case in Canada. I think there's a far more nuance here in terms of like the dialogue and the debate. And I live in a bubble. You also live in that bubble. I also work in a particular sector of the economy where it's a very diverse group of people from different political backgrounds who get together and have conversations, right? I think that happens more than we think across this country. In terms of populism, I mean, I think it's something to keep an eye on. It's definitely present, but it's not something it's not new. You know, we've seen populist politicians through history on the right and on the left. You know, it's that sort of down with the elite, down with the man, up with the people. It's not new. It's something that has been a particular focal point because of, yes, what's happened in the U.S., because of, you know, Bolsonaro. You look at Viktor Orban, you know, you see these leaders really embracing that. I mean, I believe in, say, Corbyn in the UK, you know, the past Labour leader. So it's there. It's always been there.
Absolutely. And I think one of my, I don't know who says it off the top of my head, but one of my favorite quotes is, you know, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And I feel like it's so, you know, telling, like you can look back to Caesar, like the first populist, right? Like just something basic as that and throughout history. And it's really interesting too, I think, from a political and economic standpoint to see when times are tough. Obviously, that's when we're going to see a lot of populism rise. And it's so interesting, again, you know, going to our very first topic of the pandemic and different political outcomes based on how different governments handled things. And to your experience, looking at that international scale, how does politics play out in different countries? You've seen that firsthand. You've worked on election campaigns and the democratic process. How can you either compare that to what you see in Canada when we hear politicians, some who might not be named, but, you know, wanting to make Canada the freest country on earth? Like, what is that from your experiences in Ghana, Algeria? What is that? What kind of message does that resonate with you?
Canada is one of the freest countries in the world. You know, this is indexed by international organizations. We live in one of the freest countries in the world. Like, yeah, I mean, just go outside, look at Ukraine. You know, look at the conflicts going on in the world. Like there is a lack of freedom in other places in the world. Canada is not the place where freedom is lacking. You know, yeah, I have had some pretty interesting experiences overseas. I've been lucky enough to work for an organization called the National Democratic Institute in Algeria in 2012. That was my first stint with NDI. You know, in Algeria was the only country in that Middle East, North Africa region where the Arab Spring didn't hit in 2011. Protests came later, but it was a country that didn't have that. And for many reasons, it had a leader who'd been in that position for a very long time. It is still an emerging democracy, and you know, Georgia being another one where I've spent some time. Emerging democracy. You know, Georgia's an interesting case because it's following, you know, through the 90s, it was a very dark time in that country. It was led by a leader who was not a very nice person. So, you know, and when we talk about popular politics, I see that in a country like Georgia, where it's very much about the individuals running for office and their popularity over policy initiatives, right? As an emerging democracy, that makes sense. So I don't remember what your initial question was. I think it was just sort of reflect on
like what it, you know, with that experience through the national institution, like, you know, what influence and understanding of global politics and governance and democracy did you gain from that?
I mean, I think it's huge, and I think it's really important. I read an article a couple of weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, in the Globe by Roland Paris and Margaret Biggs, where they're basically pushing to get more students access to international education, to actually experience life in different countries and parts of the world. I think that is immensely important. You and I have both, I know, gone to school abroad. I didn't do it in my undergrad. I remember well, in my first job on Parliament Hill, I said, I got to go to grad school. I want to learn. Like I've always been that person that wants to. I love being entrepreneurial. I love being innovative, and I want to learn. So I remember deciding, okay, I'm gonna do grad school. What was, I'm thinking about what were my favorite classes in undergrad, and so it wasn't really like, where's my career path going? It was, what can I learn about a subject I'm interested in. And I ended up going to Queen's University in Belfast to do my master's degree there, and sort of looking at conflict studies. And it was a time where Canada was part of a major conflict in Afghanistan. So I did look at peacekeeping and that transition Canada made from a peacekeeping nation, or sort of that mentality that we had about being a peacekeeping nation, to being really a nation involved in kinetic operations. Then taking a liberal internationalist view, I would say, on what Canada needs to do, considering our defense and engagement in the future. Though that opportunity to live in Northern Ireland was amazing, not only because I got to experience a different part of the world, but this was a part of the world that has also been in conflict and has a very interesting political situation, right? It's been in the news this week because it's the first time a Republican has taken the role of First Minister in Northern Ireland. And I won't get into how the political system works in Northern Ireland, but it's a power-sharing government, and it's always been that role of First Minister has always been someone with unionist ties. So most recently, the Democratic Unionist Party was in that role through Brexit. And let's just say the people of Northern Ireland may not have been that happy. The last election in Northern Ireland took place in 2022, and it took them 2 years to sit and go, oh God, we're going to have a Sinn Féin leader in that role. How is that possible? So, I'm going on a tangent, but what I'm trying to say to you is, I think it's really helpful to get a sense of not just, going on vacation and sitting on a beach in the Dominican, but actually, either going to school abroad, or then, I was lucky because I got to work abroad as well, to see how, it is in different countries. And you appreciate, I think that might be a Michael Ignatieff quote, but you appreciate your country from abroad when you're abroad and you're experiencing a different political system and a different way of life and different culture.
As staffers now, we're 24/7 plugged in. Something comes out on Twitter, my minister's got to respond. How are we reacting to that? Like, I think I have insomnia, so I was up until like 3 a.m. one night, and I saw, I think something happened in Chile, and the prime minister and his staff, retweeted something about it at like 3 a.m. I guess this is like a long-winded way of me asking, based on your communications background, do you think that's better for government and policy to be always tapped in? Because I feel like a lot of time there's not breathing room to, receive, digest the information, and then let's put out a proper statement. Because I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like a lot of politicians backtrack these days because they're just reacting to what they saw instantly.
Yeah. I wouldn't say there's a better and a worse. I think this is just the reality. When I worked on Parliament Hill, the news cycle was far slower. When I went to grad school, I got my first Facebook account, so 2006, and I started on MySpace first. You probably that's MySpace. So it's it has become a reality, and it's just, I don't know if we can stop it from moving forward, because of course now we're encountering generative AI, and over the past year and a half, that has become very much part of our reality and very much a part of the focus of politicos. We saw the election in Argentina happen, and generative AI played a huge role in that election on both sides of the campaign, to each candidate tearing down the other one using imaging, using video. It's kind of terrifying, to be quite honest with you, as it relates to politics and elections. given we are in the year of elections. I see both sides of it because, of course, I do work in the communications space, and I do see how generative AI is impacting the opportunity within that space to get messaging out, to do it quicker, to create campaigns around an issue or an image or a product very quickly and very impactfully. But I do worry about that and the upcoming election in the US, for example, especially as it relates to audio, the use of audio and that disinformation campaign. So, I mean, I think it is part of a reality. Like, as a staffer, I do recall also not sleeping very well. It was, I happen to work for MPs and a senator from different parts of the country. So you're always on, because they live in different time zones. And they're on a plane, and you expect to get a series of directions.
When your minister landed, when you just got like these back to back, like you're like, oh God, just give me a second. Like, the airplane mode keeps staying on. Like,
yeah, I mean, I don't think we can't retract back. Like, this is just our reality, right? And we just have to move with it. I think the pandemic gave us all kind of pause and a moment to breathe. But, if you're in it, you're in it. And that's the reality of it. You want to put yourself in political office. And as a woman, of course, we both know that there are many things that go through women's brain. And in terms of political campaigns, attempting to convince a woman to run, it takes a lot longer.
That is. Why do you?
Oh my gosh, because you have to weigh it all. How is this going to impact my life? Women take on more of the care responsibilities in a household. I had lunch with someone the other day, and she said to me, it's amazing to be a man. Here I am getting the kids ready, packing bags, doing this. And there's my husband sitting at the door waiting for me. Like, I live that existence too, right? You're just on. Oh, you have to be on a lot.
What makes good policy?
100% dialogue and inclusion. I've had conversations with women politicians in particular in elected office, and where they've said to me, like, there are members of opposing parties that won't speak with me. Like, how do you advance anything without having good dialogue? Right.
And I just want to say, it's 2024. We're still dealing with those issues.
Yeah.
What?
I mean, this was a conversation a number of years ago, but I think we are. I love seeing, the Coalition for a Better Future example of Lisa Raitt and Anne McClellan, having those discussions on a stage, like, so people can see it. And I think that is what's so important. And my work at PPF, I really dedicated a lot of focus in the events that I would convene, because, of course, PPF is known as a convener of large and small events. I always did my utmost to make sure that we were looking at Canada and all its people, so as best we could, right? And so that, for me, meant looking at a diversity of voices across the political spectrum, lived experiences, not only focusing on, we're going to talk about Indigenous relations, we have to have a full Indigenous panel. No, include Indigenous voices throughout conversations, right? I think that's so important. We're in 2024. The gender balance should be a real thing too. You need to make sure there's as many women as there are men, and there's, you're looking across every aspect of DEI, which I think is essential, if we're going to advance ourselves as a country. So yeah, that was where I really paid a lot of attention to at PPF.
I think that ties into, like, advancing ourselves, and people want to throw around the buzzword innovation. And I think innovation means a lot of layers. Like you said, it means, not just having a dedicated Indigenous panel, but incorporating those voices in AI, in art, in business, because it's everyone, just even something as basic as women being in politics, we bring that different perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, and yeah, all issues are women's issues. Like there's no specific, like there's like Indigenous issues are all issues as well. Like we are all people living within the society. We need to be part of the
words equal. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting, and I think again refreshing that you were able to bring that to PPF, and you've had a very broad career, and I want to know too, like, what was it like? You recently made a career change, because I think it again, women get predominantly more impacted in job spaces. What motivated you to make a change in your career most recently? And what advice do you have to anyone kind of feeling stuck in their career?
Right. Well, my career has been pretty dynamic. So another change is not like, every change is hard. Navigating changes is difficult, of course, but embracing it, I think, is really important to having from my perspective, to having an interesting career. And I have friends who, finished the undergrad and went in through the FSWEP program into a job in the public service and have stayed in that job and, have had a consistent income their entire life. And that's their decision. That's their choice. Mine was never that. I've had gaps in my career. I have traveled. I have been a consultant where, you don't have consistency. When I'll just talk a little bit about the Public Policy Forum. I came back to Ottawa in 2018, and the opportunity to work at PPF came up. And I knew from day one, when I was going through the application process, that I wanted this job. And it wasn't an organization I knew loads about. It was one I knew existed. You see their pieces when you're working in politics, of course. And I knew maybe one person who worked there. Like I didn't know a whole bunch of people there either. And the application process, they asked me to detail an event that I would put on, like who would be the individuals who are part of it? What's the subject matter you're discussing? What's the end goal? How do you get to the recommendations? So that drew me in, and I was talking to other, public affairs related organizations and jobs, and PPF offered me a 3-month contract, and I turned down any other job I was considering because this was really interesting. Now, working in a not-for-profit is challenging, which I now know. And this is small. This is not a big organization.
Yeah.
This is, it's sort of between 20 and 40 people. So it was a dynamic and interesting place to work. But yeah, there's the struggles of working in a not-for-profit are real. And the turnover, of course, that we've experienced in recent years in these types of jobs was real. And I have a 4-year-old, so, balancing being a mom and a solo parent. Quite often my husband works overseas, and that kind of work was challenging. So I decided it was time to look for something else, to try something else. And I hadn't, a lot of people make that transition from government either into law or a lot make the transition to public affairs and government relations out of working as a staffer. And it was never something I spent a lot of time considering, I guess, but it made sense. It made sense at this point in my career. And I kind of hope that what I bring to the table at an organization like the one I work for is this diversity of a career. So having worked in
the wealth of experience and all that. I think it really is important, because you need these diverse people in these spaces. Like, just, going back to our first point, like, I think if you, go fresh out of school and go right into bureaucracy, like, I feel like again, being on the other side as a political staffer, you see the differences in how you critically think. And
yes,
what I think the most powerful thing about politics is it really is a representation of the people, in the sense of, working in a constituency office, you have lines, that you have to share with someone, like, but you can't just say, oh, I'm sorry you lost your job. You know, you're dealing the front line of the public, and, you know, just using spit out bureaucratic lines that are probably being generated on ChatGPT right now. But you know, it's I think really interesting to adapt to that. Again, coming from your background in comms, politics, it makes sense that why they're all so interwoven, right?
Like, completely. And I wouldn't have my career path any other way. I you know, there were struggles, of course, anytime you move to a new place and you try to set yourself up, especially, you know, when I decided to move back to BC, it was hard. And I'm lucky I have a partner and a husband that was able to sort of help me make sure that I didn't go destitute. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have had it any other way. And I just think that's just kind of the person who I am. I'm always looking for something different to do. And I personally thrive in an environment where I am tasked with being, I'll bring that word up again, innovative, finding solutions to challenges. And PPF gave me you know, a place where I could do that, and where I work in public affairs and communications now. So, you know, the clients that I work with and will work with give me that opportunity as well to help them solve problems. And it's never, you know, it's never the same. Every work day is different, and that's what attracts me to this kind of work.
What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Unrelated to my career, maybe in some ways. I waited a long time to have my son. And so I would say to my 20-year-old self, don't wait too long, because you might have to go through an incredible process to have a child. And I did. I don't talk about it a lot, but and I'm not going to get teary because I'm so happy that I have my son. But it was a long process. So if you're thinking about having kids, and not everyone will, but if you're thinking about it, think about fertility, because it's a big issue.
I think it's, you know, I think it's, again, going back to social media, I think it's a bit more of a safer space, because it is, I don't know about you, but it's conversations I am having with my friends.
Good.
And it's really, I think, important, because I think people don't realize it. And, you know, we're driven ladies, and that should impact, you know, our future planning. But I think it is a reality. I'm glad we're having these conversations now, and I appreciate you sharing that. It is a huge reality, and it's one that once you get into that world, you realize how many other people are impacted, and the world of social media, how that plays on, you know, your own mental health going through that, all of that. Like, I try not to talk about, I mean, I do talk about it with people who are open to talking about it, and I always leave myself open to those, you know, having those conversations. But it's, you know, when your social media feed catches up to you and you realize, and now, you know, I've done the analysis. I know that not everything you put on social media is perfect, right? Everything is perfect. Everyone's life is perfect. And we know that that is not the truth. But when you're struggling with anything, it can be really, really hard. So yeah, I would tell my younger self, you gotta think about this, because life goes fast. It does.
I'm not in my 60s, I'm not in my 80s yet. And I hope to be, you know, someone who's continuing to give through my 80s, because I love, and my 90s maybe, but I love seeing, you know, policy leaders, you know, the likes of Janice Stein, out there as octogenarians, like, killing it. I love that. But yeah, you kind of hit your 40s and you realize life goes fast, and you have to embrace it all. You know, where when you're younger, it's like, I have so much time. Anyway.
No, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I hope that opens up, you know, more conversations for other people to have, because it's important. Women's health's important. You know, having these safe spaces to share these pieces is really important. And I think, you know, more broadly, I guess, as we're wrapping up here, what advice do you have for any, you know, young professionals aspiring to pursue careers, family life? Like what would you say your closing thoughts are?
Oh, I mean, be open. Be open to opportunities. Talk to people when you think there's something that you want to achieve, or that's a path you'd like to take. My first opportunity with NDI came about because I had a phone conversation with someone who I was connected with. She had worked for NDI in Northern Ireland, and she and I had maybe a 45-minute, hour-long phone conversation about her work at NDI. And she then recommended me when a job came up in Algeria. I happened to speak French, so that was helpful. And they were looking for French speakers. So you'll see NDI has a lot of Canadians who work there because of the French. But yeah, I mean, have those conversations. Don't be afraid to reach out. People like it. Right? You reached out to me, and I'm here having a chat with you right now. Embrace the opportunity. Be ambitious. I mean, I wouldn't consider myself as someone who's incredibly ambitious. I am kind of someone who tears myself down a lot. I am.
I was gonna say, you were so hard on yourself. You're not ambitious. What? We spent an hour talking about how cool your career was. I'm not ambitious.
I sit there and I think about everything I say. I analyze it. I'm self-deprecating. It might not come out, but that's a reality. Exactly. So put yourself out there, because others will appreciate it and will help you on your path to whatever career it is that you end up, pursuing. And don't be afraid of change. It makes you more adaptable in the long run, and will lead eventually, if you are focused, to the career that you want to have.
Well, Katie, I think those are very wise words to live by, and I again appreciate your time and for sharing and helping build my community here. And I just want to thank you so much. I hope this is one of many conversations that we keep having, and I just appreciate your time and again your wise words.
All right, Julia, thank you. And I'm so happy to see you doing this. I think there needs to be more conversations among women, and really, really impressed with your initiative to make this happen. Way to go.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was a little idea in my brain, and I was like, I have no excuse not to do it.
That wraps our very first episode on #Fempire. A big thank you to Katie Feenan for sharing her story, and to you, my listeners, for tuning in. Thank you for your support, and stay tuned for our next episode.